Okay, fabulous. So it's just about 9 o'clock here in the UK where I'm speaking from. So we're going to get started. Welcome to our third webinar of 2021, organised by myself, Christina Silva, and my colleague Sarah Bullock from the CAQDAS networking project, which, as you may know, is in the Department of Sociology at the University of Surrey in Guildford. Before we get started with the main event today, just a reminder that we have another 4 webinars scheduled between now and the end of March. So do keep an eye out on those, and they are all free and available to register from the links on our website. And the recordings of previous webinars are posted on our YouTube channel. So you can access that and you'll get the link with this recording as well. Also, just to remind you that we've currently got some reductions on all of our training courses in order to support students and researchers whilst we're all learning remotely. So do check those out as well. Okay, so on to the main session today. This is our first user webinar for a while and the first in a series of 3 user webinars in the coming weeks. We find these webinars, when we ask users of qualitative software to share their experiences, to be really invaluable because they constitute opportunities to look inside what can sometimes feel like a little bit of a black box. That is the process of doing analysis and research. So we're really grateful to the contributors for this rare opportunity to hear about the experiences of doing research using software. Today, we're really delighted to welcome Dr. Jacqueline Priego, who is going to share with us her experience of analysing diary data in MAXQDA, where she will talk about some of the lessons learned from co-produced projects that she's worked on. So we're really excited to hear about that. Jacqueline is a senior lecturer in social psychology at the University of Portsmouth in the UK, and that's where she's joining us from today, I believe, Portsmouth. She's a chartered member of the British Psychological Society and a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy. She has a PhD and an MSc in social psychology from the London School of Economics and Political Sciences. Jacqueline is a social psychologist, and her expertise lies at the intersection between education and healthcare interventions for the psychosocial well-being of youth in socially excluded communities. She's got a keen interest in the use of participatory and creative methodologies, as well as in systematic review methods and approaches to the systematization of multi-country qualitative datasets. She's also an experienced and listed trainer of MAXQDA, which is the software that she's going to speak to us about today. So please do ask questions at any time in the chat function. Sarah and myself will collate those questions and pose them to Jacqueline at the end of her presentation. So, with no further ado from me, I will stop my share, Jacqueline, and pass over to you.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Christina and Sarah, for inviting me today. As you and our attendees know, I'm going to be talking about the use of MAXQDA for the analysis of diary data. I am going to present 2 projects to you and how I went about systematizing the data and some possibilities for analyzing them. And derived from that, I'm going to open up this space. I know we won't have like lots of time for debate, but for some questions that I still have and that are still stimulating me in the analysis and reanalysis of this data. So let me just tell you how I am going to proceed. The way in which I'm going to proceed is in 2 main steps. First, I'm going to introduce the 2 projects we'll be discussing today, as well as their objectives. This will, of course, offer me the justification for the use of solicited diaries, which is the method. And I will show you how these methods respond to those projects' objectives. And obviously that paves the way for me to show you the actual data So I'll briefly outline what these data are. And the second stage of the presentation will go from preparation of the data for analysis before and within the software, as well as through some options for systematization and analysis of the data using certain features in MAXQDA. And I'll finish with some points for discussion in relation to the role of the software in the co-production of data, and not only data, but also different stages of the research process. Just carry on. So let me first introduce the two projects we'll be talking about. Both of them involve university students and were conducted as part of a research fellowship in a previous post of mine here in England. So study A is the first study involved undergraduate students who were involved in research placements. This is an important topic because traditionally when we think about a researcher, we would be considering someone who has been educated at least to a certain postgraduate level, at least to a master's level. So we can think about these students as researchers in the making, if you want, and there is a huge literature about this, mainly coming from the US and also some literature here in the UK. And here what I am presenting to you is the objectives as they have evolved. And this is important because this will have an impact on the analytical possibilities I will present to you as they condition the unit of analysis that I will focus on. So initially my goal was to ascertain what kind of learning gains these students attained within their placements. So I was thinking about, for example, classifying skills. As I went along, however, it became apparent that one way of grouping these participants is related to the kind of discipline their project is located in. Not necessarily the discipline the student comes from, so they may be, for example, studying, say, psychology, but they may be doing something in, that may be classified as a STEM, but they may be doing something in the humanities and social sciences, for example. So I came up with three groups that I'm going to describe to you when I get to the analysis. So this is kind of to give you a flavor of what this study is about. And as you can see, the objectives are evolving, okay? And the second study involved students who are carers. This is in light of the dearth of literature with and for this group. It is very difficult to track student cares, as until recently there was no established way of identifying them. Care or being a care is not your traditional demographic indicator, so this is not a kind of a question that we traditionally ask from people, like, do you care for someone? And this is even is also not the case with students. Now, the objectives based on a literature review made a point about the impact of caring on learning. I now recognize that learning also shapes the experiences of caring. This is something that has come out of the analysis. Also, as this research was funded by a university, we have another objective of knowing more about these students and their university experience as a whole. And something that became very important is the range of support avenues that they may have encountered during their studies. We also hope to contribute to wider debates about these students within the widening participation agenda in higher education. So this is study B now. Those are the two studies and their objectives. Now, how is the method fitting into these objectives? Well, there are a series of points in relation to those objectives and why I thought that solicited diaries would actually fit the bill of those objectives. First of all, with diaries, we can see temporal dimension and spot modifications in behaviors and thinking as reported by the actual participants firsthand. So those would be within person changes or alterations. This, at the time in which I designed the studies, was particularly important for study A, to see how the student would evolve within the research placement, say in terms of their learning gains, for example, and also in terms of their relationship with the supervisor. That would have been something very important. In terms of diaries with student carers, it was also important to see the range of behaviors and experiences that I would display across a certain amount of time. One of the criticisms that some researchers have made in relation to data about caring is that those data usually reflect a snapshot of what happens in the life of the care, because it is too multidimensional to be captured, for example, by a single interview. And so I wanted to show more of not only the snapshot, but also the moving picture across time. So that was important, and to show changes and a range of experiences. So that was something that fit with the objectives. Also, perhaps more important for study B than for study A, I expected that there was going to be a greater reporting of sensitive behaviors or behaviors that were not easily captured, say, during an interview, because of many reasons, but the interviewee may not recall about those experiences. For example, imagine about remembering about a single point every single day for a month, which is what we asked from them, as I'm going to tell you in a bit. So imagine about having to remember about all of that. So it's not easy to report about temporal data, say, in an interview. And also within that data that has a temporal dimension, some specific behaviors, and taking care of someone, in particularly helping with their cleaning of the body, for example. It would be something that would be too sensitive perhaps to talk about, and we didn't know at the time whether we would get specifically that, but it was something that was expected. And related to that, this I expected was going to give us a unique window into practices that we would otherwise not have access to, because of the intimate, in particular for study B, because of the intimate nature of caring, of the relationship of these students with the people they care for. And also, when we think about study A in terms of the students in the research placements, it's complicated to have someone shadowing you, for example, of to have a camera, which could have been another method of exploring this. It would be too intrusive. And also, many of them, this I didn't know at the time, but many of them reported that it was perhaps the same every single day, doing kind of repetitive tasks. So it was a way, apologies, with this method for them to reflect exactly on that. And I can also acknowledge that this also offered this possibility of reporting as they went along, either in their project as a research placement, or in the case of study B, in their everyday lives. It offered a channel for these participants to explore some subtle resistance. I'm going to show you, for example, one of the photographs that one of the participants took after the referendum, for example, in which this participant was really disappointed that that was the way of reflecting it. So yes, so this is a kind of the fit between the method and how it responds to those research objectives. So what kind of data did we get out of that method? Well, for study A, we had a participatory planning session. This is part of the data set, but it hasn't been analyzed. It wasn't structured at all, but basically we use these planning sessions to come up with a template that we gave students so that they could structure their diaries. This was important because otherwise we expected some anxiety in relation to what they had to basically record in these diaries. And we ended up with 18 student researchers as our participants, and the data sources are nearly 300 diary entries and 6 interviews. These interviews were used to accommodate some students who did not complete the diary entries as the minimum requirements to be included. And it was to accommodate that perhaps they would be better at engaging with interviews because of many constraints we didn't know, but we actually explored within the interview. Now, in regards to study B, what we have is only 7 participants, but this is much more data intensive than study A. And we have photo diaries for over a month. I'm going to tell you about the premise that we gave these students to take these diaries. And we also included a photo-elicited biographical narrative interview. This interview had a number of stages. Only one of those stages was photo-elicited, so the interview stands on its own as a data collection method exploring the experiences of these students. And we also had a participatory workshop, part of which was initial sorting of the photographs, as you can see portrayed in the picture on the right. Okay. So if we compare the data between these 2 studies, what we can see is that, sorry, one thing I should have mentioned is that, as you may have ascertained by now, both of these studies required solicited diaries. So whenever I am talking about diaries in this context, I am talking about diaries that I requested participants to produce for me. There was obviously we underwent ethical clearance, and there was a way of reimbursing students for their time. So for example, if we think about participants in study A, for example, who were earning a wage in terms of the placements that they were taking part in, one may ask, like, why not to have a similar amount if you want to compensate them for the time they were investing in this project? And that's exactly what we did. And so there was a whole setup for them to be able to produce these diaries and rely them onto me at the time. So the frequency of measurement was every time they worked on the project. So this would be like at least once a day, and they didn't have you know to have regular intervals. So for example, it may be that they worked 1 day a week, and so they would report on that specific day, and it may be that the next week they work 3 days, so they would have the opportunity to report on those 3 days 3 times. Those would be 3 diaries, and they had the requirement to produce a minimum of 300 words per entry, and they had a predefined template that was the result of that participatory planning workshop. And as I mentioned, we had interviews for those students who prefer the interviews to actually producing the diaries for a host of reasons. Now, in terms of study B, we asked participants to take a picture a day that best represented their daily experiences, and this was done over a month. You are going to see that some of our participants did this, like say for 4 weeks, so 28 days. And so that was the premise. Some of them went and took much more than a picture a day. And we also had the interviews. I already explained about this, only part of which was photo elicited. And we also had this workshop that I mentioned to you before. Okay, so for study A, our data would look something like what we have on the left-hand side of the slide. It would be like the what, why, and how, any challenges, and what did you learn from this experience, okay? And some other data like the amount of time worked, etc. Not all participants, by the way, completed this by the letter as we asked them. And for study B, we would have something like this. We gave cameras, digital cameras to participants so that they could take a picture as we expected, so that they wouldn't have, to come up with their own equipment for this. However, some of the participants decided to take photographs with their mobile phones, and that was perfectly fine. It's part of the subversion that they may bring into the project as co-producers, so that was perfectly fine. Now, in terms of study B, just because of the sheer amount of photographs, we could have spotted just by manually going about it, like many documents, for example, activities like fixing part of the kitchen in this case, comforts, or what I called in one of the codes, caring for the carer in terms of food, drink, some other comforts like clothes, pets, visual comforts like a plant. And so reporting actions by showing bodies or bodily parts as we have in these two photographs. And finally, the carer and those cared for. Okay, so how does this work in terms of the software? I realized as I was revising my presentation that the subtitle of this slide should probably have been the potential and challenges of using qualitative data analysis software for diary data in co-production with participants. We're going to see that that's where the kind of complication a little bit comes into the picture. I think we could treat both solicited and unsolicited diaries as any other kind of text, for example, but I'm going to show you evidence of some decisions that I have made along the way that the software allows me now to retrace, and that they are part of this co-production, because this co-production is not only on the side of the participant, but also on my side in terms of decisions that I made. And this is important in the context of recoding and further refining. And this is a point I'm going to come back to, the potential, infinite possibilities of analysis and scrutinization of the data afforded by this software, and questioning when is a good time to stop, perhaps. So when thinking about data co-production decisions in terms of elicitation, one thing that I have mentioned already is to think about what is that constitutes a unit of analysis for our analysis. And this obviously is not fixed. It may evolve as it happened in study A. So I started looking at 18 participants. And so I was thinking about participants as my unit of analysis, not as every single diary as my unit of analysis, but it was important for me to have the diary entries separated so that I could see kind of splits in time, any changes, etc. That was my initial idea. I ended up looking at this data by creating sets that portrayed groups. This could have also been done with variables, just assigning each participant to a certain group and running that as a variable. But in a nutshell, the decision about what the unit of analysis has been paramount, and I think it is for any piece of research. But that was one of the points that I had at the back of my mind when eliciting the data. So bottom line with this point, we may start when eliciting the data with one idea, and then as we go along, this may evolve, and the software caters for that. So the second point, when I was asking participants to generate this data for me, is the dimensions of the data that are going to be explored. So is it the text? Is it the image? Is it going to be about the materiality of the artifact of the actual photograph? Is it going to be about their temporality when put together? Are we going to have any, what I call hyphenated combinations, like many researchers are talking about, text or visual dimensions, for example, or material temporal dimensions, so both of them. And again, I think the software caters to that, but those are kind of decisions to think about in advance. It doesn't mean that it's written in stone. It can be changed, but it is something that I had at the back of my mind when these data were being elicited. Now, the other point in terms of elicitation that I didn't expect was the spontaneous or non-solicited data that some of the participants would generate for me. You are going to see how I systematize that. So one of the things that happened, for example, was for study A, some of the participants would provide further materials like photographs, which I didn't ask for, or there was a question, I think, in the workshop asking whether they could include any extra material. So I said, yeah, of course, but that was not kind of part of the premise, if you want. A video that we also had about an app that was being developed by this student researcher. And then for study B, for some of the participants, we had many more photographs than we initially asked for. And the software caters to all of those needs. Now, that's in terms of elicitation. Now, in terms of other decisions that I had to make before importing the data into MAXQDA, and that was just to use tools that are adequate to the actual format that I was using. So MAXQDA wouldn't, to my knowledge, have been the best tool, say, to modify images, for example. So in this case, if you see the image on the left and then you see the image on the right, you will see that the brightness, contrast, and sharpness of the image has been adjusted so that it is clear that the object portrayed is an elderly person's alarm. Participants were happy with this arrangement, but this is a decision that touches upon issues of the researcher having an active role in what constitutes a clear photograph, because that's what is clear to me. Potentially missing the point that the photograph on the left may be giving us actual access to the lighting in the room, for example, the mood of the participant and other elements that we could potentially interpret. So this is before MAXQDA. Now, during the setup of the database, we had for study A the opportunity of having extra entries so that participants could complete the minimum that we required in terms of the compensation for the time that they invested in this. So they could come up with certain reflections. And so in the way I did it to have this, to identify these extra entries or extra data that were not necessarily the diary, was just to use color. That is something that the software allows us to. So as you can see here for the interview or here for the extra diary entries. So that's just one way, visual way of having certain control at a glance whenever we see the database. Also, another point, another decision that I had to make was how to go about what could be considered duplicates, but these are also the case for different texts for exactly the same entry. So it could also be, trying to capture this a different angle of the same setup or the same scene that the participant wants to capture. So as you can see there in the image on the left, what I have for certain photographs is the first photograph, that is the one that I coded. It could also be the second one, depending on what the participant actually said during the interview. So if they were actually adamant that the last one was the one that I actually got right, then this would be part of the whole data set, but only one of them would be coded. So those are decisions that I made consciously. And there is also in terms of keeping records of how many to include if they are not going to be coded. So if we have, for example, 4 texts about the same scene, like, do you include all of them? That's kind of something kind of to decide whenever setting up the database. And at the beginning, I treated this as cleaning, as you would traditionally do with other types of data, like seeing if there were missing data, for example, about say a day, for example. But then it became more than cleaning, about curating the database so that it made sense to me, and also that it was communicable to other researchers if need be. Now, the last point in relation to this curating process, which I think is very important, is linking up different data sources. So as you can see in these projects, I have, my focus today is diary data, but let me show you how it looks in relation to other types of data. So what we are going to see here in this video is some of the photographs that were taken by this participant and how I have linked them up with the actual text in which they are. So if you see where the cursor is there, you can see that the participant is actually this participant in particular was very systematic, going one by one with the photographs. And she refers to photograph 13, photo 14, and so on and so forth. Okay, and here what I'm showing you is a very basic feature of my MAXQDA in terms of linking, but one that I think is very important as we move more now into this exploration of data in terms of intertextuality, visuality, for example. So those are the kind of things that we may like to think how they may help us to link up. Now, let me see. Okay, one thing I wanted to say about this last image, for example, is the one thing that I've realized with this data was that even though we asked participants to take photographs of their daily experiences, some of those photographs were about text. So even though we were expecting images, as you know, those images were about text. Whether we could have analyzed those texts rather than, like, say in this case, this was about a brochure for a speeding course that the participant had to take. And whether we could analyze that rather than the actual image of it, I think that's a methodological question that goes beyond the software. But in any case, the software allows us to keep track of all of this, not only decisions, but also conversations and debates that we may be having. Now, let me move on. Sorry, this is the same. Okay. So the last point in terms of the setting up of the database, anonymization, this is something that it is necessary, and some decisions need to be made. I was guided by a professional managing and sharing research data guidance. However, as authors in relation to this acknowledge, this is highly labor intensive, and this is something that again requires proper tools for the job. So it is not something that I would just do in MAXQDA because that's not the tool for it, but had to be done. So how does it look in terms of anonymization? Well, for the diaries, you would have something like this. even though many of the participants only mentioned like one proper name, not necessarily surname, so this was necessary. And whereas for study B, what we have is more intensive modification of the images. So for example, to remove proper names, etc. And even faces of participants, because at least two of them were very happy with them, being shown. But this is a decision that I had to make in co-production with them because of a host of ethical complications that they may encounter that they may not have realized at the time. So in terms of data systematization, one of the things that I went about is the coding frame that I think is different for this project. So one option would have been to treat the diary as any other data format, such as the interview, and to treat the diaries to the same coding framework or coding system as it is called in MAXQDA. So this is the case of study A, in which all of the text, interviews, and diaries were treated exactly the same, and the same codes were applied everywhere. Okay, so I made a different decision in relation to study B, because I coded each photograph only once. This is, by the way, this is work in progress, which is something I should have mentioned at the very beginning. So if you see any discrepancies in relation to how many documents appear, for example, in the projects, is precisely because of that. And anyway, I was saying that the photographs were coded, at least for this round, only once. So they belong to a single code, the whole photograph. And so a subsection of the coding system is assigned only for the photographs. And let me show you. Okay. So what you can see here is how I would go checking my coding for one specific code within that section of the coding frame. So this is going to retrieve, hopefully, all of the photographs that have been coded under that code. And what you are going to see is that I coded a portion of text within those photographs, and that shouldn't be the case, because this code is supposed to be applied only to images. Okay. So this code is called caring for the carer, as you can see, and you have many sources of comfort. And there is a text, okay? So that shouldn't be there, because this code belongs only to photographs, okay? So I was mentioning, like, this photo of the beach is one of the ones that wasn't taken with the camera. Sorry, I think it was taken with a mobile phone, and then with the camera, it was a picture of the mobile phone. So this is just checking my coding, some simple retrieval of information that is a feature of qualitative softwares in general. Now, beyond coding and retrieval, there were three elements that are not, depending on your take on it, may not be necessarily part of the analysis. Sorry, I have not coded the content generated by these actions, but you will see, first of all, well, I used memos, and as you can see in this instance on the left-hand side, what I am highlighting there is the dialogical nature of diary data. I am pointing out that the participant probably, what I interpret from this is that they wrote this explanation for my own benefit, as I may not be knowledgeable of the topic they are writing about. So this is one tool, would be the memos. The second tool would be the dedicated logbook that we have for the whole project in MAXQDA. And here, some higher level decisions that I made For example, deciding whether to include a certain participant who started the project but did not complete the minimum requirements that we had. So this is a decision that I made and I recorded when I decided not to include a participant. And so the criteria used for that were outlined there. And finally, another tool is being able to annotate specific instances of a certain code that we have in MAXQDA, as I have there, specifying or making notes about why that particular code is being applied exactly there. Okay. Now, some analytical possibilities within MAXQDA. What I'm going to present to you now is so it's in relation to study A, and what we can see here is the three different groups that I mentioned before that I came up with after getting the actual data and realizing that these participants could be grouped into certain disciplines. So the discipline, if you want, and I am making inverted commas, air commas here, of design is something that I made up that has a specific definition. So don't take it exactly as by the word. I know that this discipline is not comparable design with social sciences and humanities, for example, or STEM, but it makes, I promise it makes sense. And what we can see here in this slide is a code matrix browser. And basically what we have here in this visual portrait is the absolute numbers of the codes. And so just to compare, like which codes, for example, were represented or coded with a higher frequency under certain groups. So we can see, for example, that teamwork was something that perhaps was more prominent for the design groups, just at a glance is something that comes up, whereas data collection was something that students would do more for STEM subjects, so that like actually what one of the students called in a derogatory way as the monkey work, like having to kind of actually get the data, do the cleaning, etc., rather than the analysis and coming up with kind of insights out of the data. Okay, so this is by the way, study A is with the student researchers. And this is exactly the same, but just using the numbers and hit for the colors. Okay, so we can see what I was talking about here, teamwork and data collection here. Okay, now we can see for the same study in terms of the groups, again, now focusing on, how the actual coding looks, a certain skill like time management, for example, and we can see, a comparison side by side of the kind of things that students would be talking about. I'm not going to delve exactly into what they reported, but one of the things that we can see here is kind of if you want, all the narrative that the social sciences and humanities student that I have there has put forward in relation to how difficult it is to combine the research placement and, their studies, which is what we have just here. Okay. Now, what we have here is the same tool, but this is for study B. Instead of having absolute numbers, so instead of looking at comparing groups, what I have here is what I'm comparing is the actual frequencies of the codes by row here. So the kind of how big the circle is portrayed in relation to the row, not necessarily to the absolute numbers for that code, and we can see for whom, you know, this or for which participant this code may be more important because they talk more about it. Okay, like this one, caring in relation to the university, probably for students who are struggling more to combine both phases, like the learning and the caring. And exactly the same setup that we had before for study A, we have here for study B. But rather than focusing on text, what we can see here is the photographs. So we can see for a code such as university related, we can see things like revision. We can also see things like getting results or submitting assignments late at night. And in the case of the column on the right, what we have is an assignment that this participant had in which they portrayed, so this was a photography assignment, and they portrayed the actual person they care for within this. And we can see, you know, this kind of data side by side, make interpretations, and if this goes a little bit farther than simple retrieval, because it is, you know, putting the data side by side. Now, all of this is great and stimulating, and yet, as we can see here from this quote, some researchers use certain software for the first stages of a project, and then they continue by using some sticky notes. And this is a photograph. This is not now. This is a couple of years ago at least. But this is how I kept track in parallel. And I have to be transparent and acknowledge that, because for me, if I am talking about co-production, this is not only about participants, but as I said, also about me as a researcher. And for me, the actual objects and artifacts, the physicality of them are important. And having worked with qualitative software for, it's coming to more than 10 years now, it is still the case that I feel I need that for my own processing of the data. Now, in co-production with participants, some questions. Data elicitation, why not on the go, using the software directly? That's one thing that people may ask. So with MAXQDA, at the time that we collected the data, Max app was something that was already around. However, as many of my colleagues in creative research methods, data elicitation are recognizing more and more, it is important to acknowledge certain limitations. It's not that our participants are limited, but there are barriers to how much time they can invest. It is already time consuming to ask people to engage for a month, even if it is with a picture a day. So how much it would be if we ask them to download an app, to learn, you know, how to click here and there, even though it may be very easy, but it is asking yet another thing from the participant. So what's the limit of what we can ask from them? So time is a constraint. Ability is something that researchers are recognizing more and more, that we have to be mindful of, which relates to the familiarity or lack of familiarity with the technology used. And one question that I still haven't resolved, is that whether my goal at participatory analysis is perhaps one step too far within co-production. And as you may remember, I mentioned that one of the data sources was a workshop in which participants had a preliminary sorting of the images that they produced. So they did it physically rather than with the software. And I still haven't reconciled the sorting that they did and the actual coding that I did on my own within MAXQDA. So the way I have recently reported this is saying when the participant did initially sorted or did preliminary analysis of their images, this is what they came up with, and this is the general kind of narrative they outlined. So trying to juxtapose them, but this hasn't been this was in the reporting, but hasn't been integrated like these images I coded into MAXQDA. Now, so that's about the participant. What about the researcher? Is there a limit to how much we can explore, especially when we are dealing with micro analysis at this level? So I'm talking about 7. This was the first time that I had 7 participants in the study. It has been the smallest sample I have had, but it has been extremely labor intensive. And I got to the lengths, I'm going to show you now, of linking, spotting for, this is for study A, linking some wording that is almost the same from different participants, and all of those tools are afforded by this, not only by MAXQDA, but other packages. But the question is, to what extent we need this, because this is unlikely to make it to a journal article with restrictions of word count and with preferences for high-level findings. So are the possibilities endless? When do we decide like this is enough? Obviously we have to finish at some point for reporting purposes, but when do we stop? And another question that I have, and I want to leave you with, is more and more there are possibilities for dissemination with qualitative software. And I haven't incorporated that. We decided for study B to disseminate, to start off with immediately with an exhibition that the actual students inaugurated, which is the photograph that you can see there. I am open to learning more as to how we can incorporate qualitative software into dissemination in a way that is not onerous to our participants. And I leave you with some lessons that I learned, and I wrote these lessons sometime ago, straight after I had collected the data for those projects. And if I had to take one message, would be think about the final product. Okay, but don't think about it only in terms of what you know when you go into collecting the data, say like me when I was thinking about my unit of analysis for the first study, but also open yourself to other suggestions, to literature on qualitative software, not because they are going to give you kind of the magic bullet with or feature within that software, but because they open up possibilities for you to analyze in a way that perhaps you hadn't thought about. So it is a balance between what you can imagine, what you want, the final product that you want to see, and also some of the possibilities that the software may afford you that you may not know about. Okay. And with this, I leave you. Thank you very much. And these are some acknowledgements for institutions and people who have been very important to these 2 projects. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that, Jacqueline. On behalf of everyone who's here, I think we all agree that that was a very rich presentation that you have just provided us with. You covered a huge amount of ground, and my brain did not stop whirring. So thank you so much. I had lots of things that were going on for me listening to you there. I really enjoyed the fact that you ended with some questions, posing those to us as a group. I have a few questions here that I've noted down, but I did want to give an opportunity to anybody here who has been attending today to voice any questions that they have before I put the ones that I've collated along with Christina to Jacqueline. So does anybody want to share or pose a question that they might be thinking about to Jacqueline at the moment live in audio? Okay, that's fine. I've got a few going on in my mind, and you can always post some more in the chat if any arise to you. One of the things that came out for Christina and myself is the fact that you were talking about the decision about the unit of analysis being paramount in the study. And this is definitely something that qualitative researchers are not always very explicit about. So you get more kind of discussion around this in a kind of quantitative space than in a qualitative space. So it would be great to hear you speak a tiny bit more about why you felt it was so important for these projects to be so clear about what the unit of analysis actually was.
Thank you for that. I have to say, let me think, because to me, that comes automatically because I teach qualitative software. So
Yeah.
that's one of the points that I always teach, because as you know, Sarah, whenever we get students asking, like, should I have like all of the questions in one document, or should I have a document per question, for example, for qualitative service? And my answer is, it depends on your unit of analysis. So for me, one resource so I already mentioned, not because Christine is here, but Wolf and Silver was enlightening in that regard, because at the time I was thinking about the unit of analysis going from the individual into groups, and how it would make more sense to talk about disciplines and the type of tasks that a discipline involves, rather than the particular individual decisions that these students took. So, but I didn't have so for me it was just unit of analysis, and I had the methodological language to express that. But in terms of the software and how to communicate it in terms of software related decisions, that's the book that gave me the language, with a specific template, and kind of to say, I go from A to B, from the unit of analysis of the individual onto groups, and also to communicate that the groups may be assigned by using sets. For example, in MAXQDA, they may be assigned by using variables. So there are many ways of going about it. And I also think it comes, well, the unit of analysis decision is something that I made, but how to translate it into the software is something that comes with your knowledge or familiarity with the software and kind of the features that it offers. Don't like to talk much about features, kind of the affordances that we can have with the software. And that's all I think I would be able to say about it. Yeah, I was just thinking, in relation to study B, I can think about the whole person as my unit of analysis. But anyway, that's probably besides the point. Thank you for that. I think there is one question in the chat. Don't know. Yeah.
That's
that's it.
Comment in the chat. I did have one other one that came to Christina and myself as we were hearing you speak. So it was to do with diaries. You mentioned at the beginning being a really effective way of kind of capturing experience over time, rather than the researcher sort of parachuting in at one moment in time. And I think that's very valuable. Did you find over the course of the studies, the two different studies, that there was sort of a drop-off in the extent to which people were engaging with the study? And that was sort of one question, and kind of, I suppose, joint to that, in order to diagnose whether drop-off was happening, did you have people send you the materials as they were generating them?
Yes.
Or did you get them to send it to you right at the end?
No, both. So for study A, we had a system in which I sent them sorry, I didn't want to say too much about the project, even though I said a lot. We send them weekly reminders. It could be via text or also via email. And we ask them to submit their diaries every week, so they could also, have this psychological sense of building up a database themselves, like a product. So, and I think for the students who submitted up to 30 diaries, which was the maximum I think we had, it was the case that they were motivated and they just went for it. And so I don't think we observed anything like that. I think for the students who, because we had like a certain amount of compensation for their time. So it was for 10, like the cutoff was 10 diaries, then 20 diaries, 30 diaries. So we had these completion points, if you want, or milestones for all of the participants that were included. And for those who completed, for example, 4 diaries, they had the opportunity of undergoing an interview to make up for the diaries that they didn't have. For the second study, no. I would say that all of the participants engaged with the task. There was one in which was slightly under 28 images, if I am not mistaken. But we didn't see any of that. I think because the trick with the photo diary is that it's not that onerous. The only onus is for you to remember that you have to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We often talk to people about the benefits of collecting qualitative materials in the form of diaries. But then, of course, the challenge is the kind of keeping people going. So I think your contribution there and reflections there have been very helpful. Thank you. We have a question here. Any advice on analyzing diaries in non-English language using MAXQDA? So I don't know if you have any reflections on that. Otherwise, Christina and I can also chip
No,
in.
I do. Nuf, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Thank you for the question. And yes, MAXQDA is your tool for that. And as far as I know, it can take care of data in Western characters and non-Western characters as well. So I don't think there is unless there is something particular linguistically that you want to explore that I may not be aware of. I think it is a tool for you. It has the features to analyze data in languages other than English. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I would.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you want to
that's
chip
an
in.
accurate
Yeah.
description. Yes, no. So it's very flexible. The software can allow you to manage materials in multiple languages at the same time, or indeed in one non-English language. Absolutely, it's very flexible with that regard. So yes, I think Nuh is happy with the response there. Thank you for the question. Okay, we're going to come to a close now. Thank you so much again, Jacqueline, for today. It's been a really engaging session, and we are really pleased to say that Jacqueline's very happy for us to post the recording of today on the YouTube channel, as we usually do. There will be a small time lag. We'll do a bit of editing of the video, make sure everyone's happy with it, and then we'll put it up, and you'll get a link to that sent to you. Also, if you have enjoyed today, do engage with us in a number of different ways. You've got our Twitter handle there, and also do email us, or it would be lovely to see you on one of our courses if that's of interest to you. So I think we'll leave it there today. We wish everyone all the very best. Hope that you're all keeping well. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you on one of our webinars that are coming up between now and the end of March. Okay, everybody keep well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.